This episode of Where Did the Road Go is brought to you in part by our Patreons. If you want to become a patron, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And I am here with Wren Collier.
Hey, everyone.
Red Pill Junkie.
Happy to be back.
And Cherylee Black.
Hi there.
And this is going to be a Fringe news show because we haven't done one in a while, and there's some pretty cool stuff to talk about. Not sure exactly where we should start. What do you guys think? Want to go with the one we were just talking about before we went on the air, Red Pill?
The one about skull surgery?
Yeah.
Okay.
So basically, this is we were talking about how surgical stuff is done today, and how in the Civil War era it would have been kind of scary. And you were showing that you pulled up an article that says South America's Inca civilization was better at skull surgery than Civil War doctors. And it says the survival rate was a remarkable 80% compared with 50% during the American Civil War. And this doesn't surprise me. It seems like the farther you go back, the better the technology was.
Well, I mean, let's look up our skeptical skull for a minute, and maybe one could say, well, in times of the Civil War, those doctors were performing surgeries under more strenuous conditions, like they were in the middle of a battle. Maybe they didn't have enough resources at their disposal, or didn't have enough time or more patients that they had to attend to. Nevertheless, this is definitely something that speaks about the level of sophistication of cultures that we very easily tend to categorize as primitive, right? Just because they didn't follow our quote unquote modern rate or path of development, the Aztecs, for example. Some people have criticized them. I said, well, they didn't invent the wheel, which is kind of stupid because clearly they did. There are many examples of wheels or circular structures in their art and whatever, but. Mm-hmm. They didn't have a need to, because they didn't have, animals capable of pulling carts the same way as they did back in Europe, So there's that idea that we always tend to judge civilizations based on the path that we follow. And if they don't follow the exact same path, then therefore, they are primitive.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't understand what they knew, so they look primitive to us. And, of course, we have to be more advanced than anything that came before us.
Exactly.
Yeah, the comparison with the Civil War stuff, like Red Pill mentioned, is a little strange because, the Civil War examples would have been in a battlefield condition, with especially, if you ever read about battlefield conditions during the American Civil War, a lot of these battles were complete bloodbaths. There were a lot of injured. It wasn't sanitary. And also, too, a lot of these injuries are from cannons and musket fire, rifle fire. And that fire was notoriously dirty because it had gunpowder, dirt, all kinds of stuff in it. And that would have gotten into the wounds. But on the other hand, one thing I find fascinating about this surgery is that, if I'm not mistaken, and maybe somebody can correct me on this, they weren't using metal tools, right? Like the Inca Like they had like,
Hmm.
were they like the Aztec? Did they use like volcanic glass and things like that for cutting tools?
That I don't
Well, I
know.
don't know. I mean, I don't. I'm rereading this article
Mhm.
right now. I don't think they specify what type of tools they use. Well, nevertheless, one has to point out that knives that are made out of obsidian or volcanic glass are actually more. How do you call this?
Extremely
They
sharp.
are
Yeah.
they are way sharper than tools that are even made out of uh, uh, you know
hmm
stainless steel, or even those that are made out of diamond.
Yeah.
Yeah. It almost makes me wonder if like they had sort of more advanced surgical instruments, and they were making it out of this volcanic glass that was even that made better, medical instruments than say like a metal scalpel would. So,
Mhm.
like it's interesting. It doesn't talk about the metal. The article doesn't really talk about the medical technology at all. That's what would be really interesting to me. Like, what were they using to make these trepanations?
Well, they may not know.
Yeah.
I don't think they know. I think they only know that they made the trepanations, and that they don't even know why they performed the surgery. It was maybe because
hmm
of some kind of injury, or maybe because of other type of illnesses, or even maybe there was the idea in ancient times that you have to bore a hole in order to let the spirits escape out of the head,
Mm-hmm.
whatever.
Mm-hmm.
hmm hmm
They only know that the patient survived the operation, because
Yeah.
because the skull shows signs of growth after the hole was cut out.
hmm
And you also find that, if I'm not mistaken, we found dental surgery at very high degrees in ancient civilizations as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if they had like a better understanding of microbiology and then like possible like infection and that kind of thing than we give them credit for.
And then it got lost as we went into the Dark Ages.
hmm
Possibly, possibly.
Yeah, I was going to say that, unfortunately, the article doesn't give a lot of information as to what you're comparing here, because if you're looking at Civil War patients, they chances are they weren't going into surgery in very good shape to begin with,
Yeah.
Mhm.
because they'd have been shot or
hmm
however injured in war, where it could be that the Incan Empire patients, like, since we don't know why it was being done, they could have been quite healthy going in to the operation to begin with. So they'd have had a much better chance to start off.
hmm
So
Also, the incentive, maybe if the Civil War doctor is performing of Corporal Wilson, and if Corporal Wilson dies, oh well, whatever. But if you're performing a surgery on the daughter of the Inca emperor,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you better do a better job, or it's your
Right.
head.
yeah, I mean, and of course, like, I just, you're comparing apples and oranges if you're looking at peacetime surgery versus surgery out in the war, out in the war
Mhm.
theater. It's
Yeah,
just,
like a field hospital surgery. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, even today, it's a different.
Yeah.
It's
Sure.
like what an ambulance can do at the scene of an accident versus what you can do for those patients once you get them to an ICU.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think, though, it makes the point that these people were not primitives.
Yeah.
They obviously knew what they were doing.
Well, and I agree with that, and I think that, I mean, far too often traditional medicines and cultures are overlooked,
Yeah.
because there's this unfortunate attitude that, well, how could they know anything? Well, they could know quite a bit. People are very smart,
Yeah.
and it doesn't really, matter what culture they come from. That they're going to use the tools that are available to them, and and what's in their environment and make the best of it. So,
Well, yeah, and they also mentioned that the samples that they took, went from a 40% success rate to what looked like almost 91%, and this is over the course of 1,000 years. I mean, that's like 1,000 years of refining a technique or technology. I mean, it's not surprising at all that they would get really, really good at it if they spent 1,000 years perfecting it.
True.
It's a very, very long time to be.
You would hope
working on
they would
something.
get good at it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that's what we don't think about with some of these ancient cultures. I mean, had thousands of years to develop technologies and techniques and medical knowledge. I mean, you could compare that to us. I mean, we think we're so advanced, but we've only been like, the industrial era is only, like a couple hundred years long.
Yeah.
So, they may not have had industry like us, but there's no reason to think that they didn't have like surprisingly good technology in whatever fields were culturally like important to them.
And that's the key. What's important to them, because what's important to them isn't necessarily what's important to us.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. I wanted to talk about the article Red Pill. I haven't read it because you didn't drop it for us, but the one on the Daily Grail that you were talking about. So tell us a little about that.
Well, more than an article, it's like a commentary on an audio recording that Jeremy Corbell. Jeremy Corbell is a guy who is producing a lot of really interesting material. The documentaries and films, and he's about to release 2 films this year. One about the Skinwalker Ranch, and the other one about Bob Lazar. So this guy released an audio interview with a guy who went by the name Trevor. So no, he didn't give his last name. He didn't give his full identity. But this Trevor guy claims to have been a radar operator, was stationed at the USS Nimitz back when they had those UFO sightings that we've been commenting on since December of 2017, when the New York Times released that now legendary article revealing the existence of this secret Pentagon program, that the one that Tom DeLonge and Luis Elizondo and all of these people have been promoting, right? So because of that article and also those videos that were released, that they're very brief, they're very grainy, they show, this small clump of white pixels that they tell you that there was an unknown target that was tracked by the gun camera on board one of those F-18s that were launched in order to intercept the objects. And so this guy, Trevor, he says that he was one of the radar operators stationed at the Nimitz back when they had those sightings. And he saw the unknown targets on his radar screen. And he says that they were so fast that in his screen, it appeared as if they were, jumping from place to place, meaning, their speed was so great that they were even able to keep track on them with the radar. But the most interesting thing about that interview, and I'll put a link to it so you can guys check it, and also for you, Seriah, to share it with your listeners, is that according to Trevor, after the F-18s returned to the Nimitz, he managed to see a video taken by the cameras of one of those planes. And that video was not only much clearer than the ones that we've seen so far, disseminated through mainstream media and to the STARS website, but also that the object that appeared in that video wasn't shaped like a tic-tac. There was the same way that it has been mentioned, not only by Luis Elizondo and these To the Stars guys, but also by the pilot, one of the pilots that was sent to intercept the craft. So according to Trevor, this guy, if he's telling the truth, the video that he saw, showed an object that was shaped like a typical flying saucer, with a dome on top and a flat bottom. So if this is true, it raises the question, why is it that we haven't seen that clear video? Is it because they're not releasing it because it was recorded using technology that the Pentagon or the Department of Defense doesn't want to disclose, in order to not give foreign enemies an advantage or a heads up of the kind of capabilities that American, warplanes have? Or is it because at the end of the day, all this, disclosure or, supposed disclosure that we've been witnessing since December or October of 2017, because in October it was when we heard about the To the Stars initiative, and in December it was when the New York Times released these articles, and since then we've been talking about them. So maybe this whole program is some kind of like perception management operation carried out by some intelligence, department for reasons that we just can't ascertain yet. But it really doesn't have anything to do with this trying to come clean and actually finally revealing what the United States government knows or doesn't know about the existence of unidentified flying objects.
Yeah. I would say that's probably exactly it. It's disinformation of one form or another.
What really struck me from your description there? The fact that the pilot saw one thing and somebody else saw something completely different, or at least they're each reporting different things. And the first thing that occurs to me is that how often in cases of paranormal phenomena do you get various people all having a different experience of whatever it is?
Yeah.
It's a really good point you're raising there.
And we're also looking at an event that happened, 14 years ago? 2004. So, I mean, memory is a very faulty thing, too.
Well, memory might be a faulty thing, but I think that I could remember the difference between a Tic Tac and a traditional flying saucer. And it seems to me that if I were somebody and I knew that there was an unidentified thing in the air because all the pilots have been scrambled and everyone's trying to deal with it, what would I expect to see? What in my little, where's the file drawer for that kind of unexplained thing? It might be the traditional flying saucer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to color how it's like with NDEs, where people have NDEs, those experiences are always influenced by your personal idiosyncratic experiences and view of the world and everything. Who you are has a big impact on your, how you describe your NDE and how you make sense of it. And that seems to be the case with all of these unusual phenomena, that they're all filtered through us. So the fact that there are different reported, things being seen, that's almost like, that's how this phenomena does this.
Yeah.
If you wanted to take the other, or go ahead, Red Pill.
Sorry, there are many conflicting things about this new revelation. If it is, a new revelation. I mean, Jeremy Corbell says that he has been researching the background of this guy. He has checked his credentials, and that everything checks out. That this guy is who he claims he is. Okay, but one thing that I mentioned to Jeremy during a Twitter exchange is that there's a thing between confirming a person's background, and there's another thing, but it's not the same as confirming his story. Because it's the same. It's the same as some people who have said, well, yeah, George Knapp has confirmed that Bob Lazar did work at Los Alamos and did work at Area 51 because he knew where the cafeteria at Area 51 is located, and he knew how you go about and pay for your meals there. Okay, but that doesn't mean that by that you confirm his story or the things that he
Right.
claimed to have witnessed in Area 51, the alien craft that was trying to be reverse engineered or whatever. So one point that I'm bothered by in this new story is the fact that this guy Trevor, he was stationed at the radar, then he's he's relieved of duty, so he passes on and he's replaced by one of his colleagues, and he goes and stays, I don't know, someplace else in the aircraft, resting, whatever. And he's being called back by that guy who replaced him, and he calls him and said, "Dude, you have to come here, and watch this." So Trevor claimed that he went back to the CDC, where there were a few other officers, and they were able to see this video. And that to me sounds like what, is that how they operate inside a USS Navy aircraft carrier, that everybody is allowed to go inside the CDC and nobody asks you what are you doing here, or you're not supposed to be watching this is classified information, you better not talk about this thing because, there's a need to know basis and all these, stories that we hear whenever a member of the military has supposedly encountered material that may or may not confirm the existence of UFOs. So to me, that's bothersome. Like it almost sounds like some kind of psyops on the part of someone who was testing the reaction of those officers who were at the CDC watching this video. And let's not forget that the USS Nimitz was performing war games at that time off the coast of San Diego. So they were testing new technologies there. As part of these war game operations. So, everybody has said. Some people have speculated, well, maybe these Tic Tacs or whatever, they were not really, alien craft. Maybe there were some kind of new drones.
Right.
Some people have refuted that, saying, no, all the evidence shows that these objects had possessed capabilities that were far beyond our current state of technology. Well, I don't know. I still feel that this thing is kind of fishy. You know what I mean? I mean, like, I feel like we are just being more embroiled, and the more we try to peel up this onion, the more it smells bad.
Yeah. I didn't think about that before, but the idea that the whole Nimitz thing could have been a staged event in the first place, and that they were gauging the reactions of crew members, people who are working, and that not everybody on board was in the know about what was happening, but that it was part of some sort of war game or operation to see how they would react if confronted with something that seemed out of this world. Because that would be a valuable research and information and data to work with.
Well, the first thing that struck me, okay, I'm reading your article now, and it's like, I'm pretty sure you Americans have non-disclosure agreements you sign when you retired from the military, just like every other military does. So I know I signed those things when I retired from the Canadian military, and we're pretty Mickey Mouse compared to some.
Right.
Seriously, I wouldn't go talking about, it just, that really makes no sense at all. That somebody does that. Now that I'm reading through it, not only that, but if there's like a secure video that not everybody is supposed to see, then not everybody sees it.
Yeah.
Like that's the security procedures are pretty. They're pretty strictly followed by all
Right.
militaries. It's not like it's their first rodeo. It's not like how do we secure the country today, guys? I mean, they know how to do it. It's there's procedures you follow, and it's like becomes automatic. It's not oh gee, we goofed up today. Well, we'll do better tomorrow. No, you follow procedures every day.
Yeah, because apparently this video that Trevor saw at the CDC had already been downloaded into what he called the CipherNet, which seems to be a highly classified, super secret, super fast network or internet that the U.S. military uses, and it's not used by the civilian population. So, so you will assume that the things that are distributed through this CipherNet are classified material.
Right.
Like, okay, so nobody talked to this guy. Nobody reminded him. You shouldn't talk about this thing if you care about your pension. Well, maybe that's the reason why he hasn't come with his full name, right? Because he's worried about those kind of repercussions. But at the same time, what about this other, guy, the guy who has been interviewed by CNN and all the news sites, I don't remember his name right now, Fravor or something like that. Apparently, he did that because he was allowed to by his superiors. Like, okay, yeah, you're allowed. There's no problem in you talking about this event that happened 14 years ago. There's no risk to your pension, if you talk about this, because this is what Elizondo and the To the Stars guys have said, that the release of this material was sanctioned by the Department of Defense. So what is going on here? They're sanctioning some material, but they're keeping other material classified. What's going on here?
Yeah, the only thing that would make sense to me is if he was told, oh, you can go and divulge these things and do it anonymously, and we won't do anything about it,
Yeah.
We know who you are, and we know you're disclosing this, and we give you permission to, but just do it anonymously, which to me would reek of something just being set up.
Yeah, it stands to question, like, who is okaying the release and why are they okaying it? Because I'm sorry, if you people believe that the U.S. government has your best interest in mind and they're releasing these things out of the goodness of their heart and there's not some ulterior motive going on, given all the bald-faced propaganda we're bombarded with every single day, like, and even just the history of their involvement in UFO research, like, you're deluding yourself. Because, I mean, that's why I've kept the whole Nimitz thing kind of at arm's length myself and haven't paid a ton of attention to it because it just stinks. It stinks to me. I'm sorry. It smells so bad. Like it doesn't, something is up fishy with it. And I don't know what it is, and we'll probably never know, but I'm not going to look to the U.S. government, to the State Department to solve the UFO issue for me. I don't trust it.
I mean, what happened in December 2017, it was kind of odd to see an article, positive article about UFOs from the New York Times. It was like, but at the same time, that article was accompanied by a really, really crappy, grainy black and white video. That everybody sees that. Like, say, okay, they're telling me this is a UFO. Okay, I guess, I guess I'll trust them. But if it had been something like the thing that Trevor describes, something that there was no question in your mind that this was an artificial object of unknown origin that mimicked the capabilities of was almost like mocking the flight capabilities of the F-18, almost like was toying with them, and also that it disappeared after an almost instantaneous liftoff.
Mhm.
Something that we never see in the brief video that was released by To the Stars. If we had seen that, maybe everybody would have, lost their mind. Like, lost their mind, and they were saying, "Oh my God, this is real. Aliens are real." And right now, this is the only thing that we will be talking about. Instead of talking about, I don't know, Trump's Twitters or the World Cup or whatever, we will be, obsessing about this 24/7. And maybe the people who released this, the powers that be, didn't want us to lose our SIHIT over this. They wanted to release something while keeping the wheels turning, right? While keeping everybody, going to their jobs every morning. So I don't know.
Yeah, I feel it comes down to that disinformation. Like they're trying to throw things off and see what people can figure out and what people take away from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't get rid of the feeling that it's some sort of experiment to see like how society reacts to, controlled disclosure of this kind of information, if it makes a difference to people, not because they know anything that we don't, but just because that type of sociological data is valuable to certain people for various reasons.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you have to wonder, I mean, the U.S. government has gotten involved with strange cultural things over the years. I mean, I was listening to an interview that Richard Dolan gave, and he was talking about how, the CIA had an influence over the music scene in Laurel Canyon in the 70s, and feminism and abstract expressionism. They funded Jackson Pollock, and and all of these things that are essentially affecting the culture. And you think, like, how is that helpful to a country? And clearly there must be in some ways it is helpful. And in terms of, like, with the New Age movement, where I had no idea that that was influenced by, I know there's MK Ultra and stuff, but I'm not really a conspiracy minded person generally. But just all these things, it's like, why would the CIA be interested in New Age culture or UFO convention culture, any of those things? But strangely they are.
Yeah, I mean, Jill Stein was a CIA agent who was, she was instrumental in, I guess, new wave feminism. And it's not to say that I'm anti-feminist, I'm a feminist, but I'm just saying Jill Stein was a CIA agent.
Well, none of those things are bad things. It's just, like, I listened to a lot of that music that came out of that era.
They deeply had their fingers in, like, the counterculture. It was weird. And the story that I've gotten about that, because it came out, I think, like a couple of years ago, that they had that this really famous, like, literary journal at the time was, like, funded almost completely by the CIA. And it had something to do with, like, the Cold War. Like, they wanted to, like, promote free speech and expression as a way. I mean, that was the explanation that was given, as a way to, like, undermine, like, state control over media in Russia or something. I don't know. That seems kind of flimsy to me as an explanation. I mean, we know that the reason they got involved in the UFO scene was because they were scared that, UFO researchers were leaking information about actual classified U.S. projects into Russia, because the Russians knew that that's what the UFO researchers were seeing, and they started, implanting moles within the community as well. God, you have all these, like, spy games going on, and they put their fingers into the weirdest pies, and if you start to try to look at the stuff from the outside, you realize that everybody's got a motive. Like, nobody just gives out information for free. Everybody's got a game that they're running. Right? Nothing comes out of the goodness of people's hearts, especially when it comes from the state. So when you look at this information that's coming out from To the Stars and coming out about the Nimitz and stuff, you've got to think about, what is the angle? What's the reason? Why are they doing this?
Yeah. Cui bono, who benefits from it?
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's move on to another article. One of the ones this is something I always find interesting. Man with tiny brain shocks doctors. I remember reading in the if it was either Holographic Universe or Beyond the Quantum from David Talbot. Michael Talbot. Yeah, David Talbot's Electric Universe. Michael Talbot, where he would talk about a number of cases where people literally didn't really have brains. And in those cases were geniuses. Like no one had any idea. He talks about one story where a kid was in a 30-year-old kid was in a motorcycle accident or car accident or whatever, and he died. And they, when they were working on him, they opened up his skull, and there was just water. There was nothing there. And so when they came out to the parents, they said to him, "We're very sorry about your special young man." And the parents went, "What? Why did you phrase it like that?" And they're like, "Well, he must have been severely, disabled." And they were like, "No." And he was, he had like a 140 IQ or something, and they're like, "No, that's not possible." This guy's not so extreme, but this was a New Scientist. And it says, a man with unusually tiny brain manages to live an entirely normal life despite his condition, which was caused by fluid buildup in his skull. Scans of the 44-year-old man's brain showed that a huge fluid-filled chamber called a ventricle took up most of the room in his skull, leaving little more than a thin sheet of actual brain tissue. It's hard to say exactly the percentage of reduction of the brain since we did not use software to measure its volume, but visually it's more than a 50 to 75% reduction. They said the colleagues described the case of the patient. He's a married father of 2 children and works as a civil servant. So basically he was completely normal, but he essentially doesn't have a brain.
Yeah, that's not a one-off case either, because I think Bruce Grayson mentioned a case of a graduate student, and I believe it was in the UK, where he was doing one of those things where, students will get extra money and do like test subject kind of thing. And they scanned his brain and they found out that this graduate student in mathematics had almost no brain.
And so the question, and people will be like, well, there's a lot of redundancies in the brain. That's a lot of redundancies for any system.
Yeah.
A simple brain injury can completely disable somebody. So how is it that somebody who doesn't have really almost any, 25% brain matter for this guy could possibly function as normal? Because most of the time they don't. But there are these cases where they do.
Wonder if there's some kind of weird placebo effect, and as soon as they find out, that's when they turn into idiots.
God, that would suck.
Yeah. I was actually familiar with this story. I remember when this came out back in 2007 about this guy, and I've mentioned it to other people before. But I think it's a testament to like how sort of like what we don't know about the brain. Like there's so much we don't know about the human brain, and like how plastic it is. Like what can it actually recover from, and what is actually necessary to be conscious. There's another article about this where it has a quote from a doctor who talks about this case, and he mentions that like in order to be aware, it's not necessary to simply know information, but to know that you know that information. So unlike a thermostat that simply records temperature, conscious humans both know, and they also know that they know.
Right.
So that the brain itself is continually and unconsciously learning to redescribe its own activity to itself. And these descriptions form the basis of conscious experience. And I think one of the things in this case that's key is the fact that these changes weren't traumatic, and they didn't happen like quickly. It happened over the course of 40 years.
Right.
So,
whereas a brain injury, the brain is used to functioning a certain way, and then it can't anymore.
Exactly. And it's like it probably doesn't have time to readjust because it had a traumatic injury. But in this guy's case, it's interesting because it's like small pieces of the brain were basically destroyed over the course of 40 years. And it gave the brain time enough to basically teach parts to do certain things that it used to. And it did mention that he did have I don't know. IQ isn't a great measure of intelligence. I think IQ's kind of crap, but it did say that he had a lower than average IQ. So it seems like it
Yeah.
did have some effect on him. It wasn't like he is completely functioning normally, but he was still functioning normal enough that no one knew, that no one
Yes.
could notice, which was just astounding given how much brain damage he had.
And like I said, there are a number of cases where people like this are actual geniuses.
Hmm. Hmm.
Which one of the things I wonder. I mean, as we do more research, we find that the body almost has a second brain along the gut. And the solar plexus and stuff. And does the body just say, well, there's nothing to work with up here, we'll work with what we got down there?
Our whole nervous system, extends throughout our entire body and to the spinal cord.
Yeah.
So it almost makes me wonder if other parts of the nervous system can't also act as redundancies for the brain.
Yeah. And that says a lot about how the brain is not the core of everything like we think it is.
Mhm.
Because if it works like that for other people, it probably works like that for everyone to some degree.
Yeah, it makes you wonder about how distributed the human sort of conscious system is. Like how much of our things that we think are located in a certain part of our body, like how much do other parts of our body affect the functioning of those organs?
Yeah, of course, you guys are all overlooking the fact that how much of it is our body and how much of us extends beyond our body.
Well, that was going to be my next comment.
Yeah. And like if you read cases like the one in this article in Irreducible Mind, that sort of really great textbooky kind of book that covers all of these arguments for the possibility that mind does not equal brain. So where does information come from? Can it come from beyond ourselves?
Well, would you say that the brain, even though, okay, so I agree with you that consciousness, the brain isn't the seat of consciousness, but I do think that the brain is still sort of the engine of the body, right? Like you need the brain in order to make the body move. And without the brain, there's no way to tell if there's consciousness. There may still be consciousness without the brain, but there's no way to determine that, I guess, externally, through what we, have in modern science, without the brain there to move the body or communicate with other people.
Yeah.
Well, we just don't know. I mean, there are so many things about the human body that we believe there are autonomous.
Mm-hmm.
But then by using therapies like biofeedback, we learn that we can consciously alter those kind of like movements or cycles. You can alter your heart rate. You can alter other types of metabolic processes. So we just don't know.
And
I guess I'm thinking. Or go ahead,
I was going to say, through practices like meditation, we can even affect our own brains.
The way I see it, I think the analogy I was trying to make was that, like, I kind of see our brains as like the engine and the electrical system of a car, right? Like, you still need a driver, right? But the driver can't drive the car without the engine.
Nowadays that's not really true, though, is it? Because cars can kind of drive.
That's true. Yeah.
Cars can be driven remotely.
Yeah.
But that's one of the analogies I used to make when people would say, well, if you hit someone in the head with a bat and it knocks them out, then there's nothing there, and so on and so forth. And so, consciousness is just a side effect of the brain. But if you look at the idea of the body as a car, if the car gets damage to it, you can't drive it, but it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the driver.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Same with you could do the same analogy with a computer. I mean, the computer isn't the thing; it's the person behind the computer. But if the computer stops working, the person's still there, but they can no longer interact with whatever they were interacting with through the computer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's thinking of the body as sort of an interface for consciousness.
Yeah, so this guy is akin to the human version of a Chromebook,
Yeah, just kind of streamlined.
But it's true though. It is true though that, I mean, we can't ignore this, that changes to the brain can affect things like personality,
Sure.
and consciousness too. So there is an element of, I guess, I don't know, I can't say that word. There's like an element of correlation there between the brain's healthy functioning and the expression of someone's like consciousness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And is that because maybe the signal gets scrambled on the way to the brain?
Mhm.
I don't know. I mean, how much, this is another thing too, like how much of what we see, like, you know, as our consciousness, that it exists independent of our body, how much of that consciousness is actually like what we think of as ourselves, you know?
Yeah.
Our self-identity, is our self-identity just a byproduct of is that a byproduct of our brain? Like let's entertain the idea that, you know, there's life after death or whatever. Your soul or your consciousness or whatever you want to call it, is it going to remember being you, or is it like a person playing a video game or something, you know, where they're their own person, they just happen to be writing a particular individual at any point in time, but
Right.
like kind of everything that you are now isn't necessarily going to go with you after it's all over, you know?
Well, I
Well-
mean, but even when you play a video game, you take that experience with you.
Yeah, but you who you really are isn't changed.
True.
You know?
True.
Like that, I'm probably putting this in a weird way. I guess what I'm trying to say is like how much of sort of your personality and your identity that you exhibit, like today, how much of your self-identity do you think is just part of your physical body and part of your physical brain,
Mhm.
rather than being a part of your sort of uber consciousness?
I mean, I also think that when someone dreams,
Mhm.
supposedly every single aspect of that dream world is a part of yourself, it's a part of your consciousness. Yet if I'm dreaming that I'm, you know, back in my old high school and
Mhm.
I'm in the classroom and, you know, and everybody's looking at me funny and, oh my God, I'm naked. I mean, I'm not identifying myself with the blackboard. I'm not identifying myself with the building, yet
Mhm.
that building is part of me.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know,
You know,
it's funny though, because if like, you know, I've had some correspondence with people who are kind of in the dreamer community,
Mhm.
and they would argue that first off, you can sometimes make connections to other conscious beings in your dreams, like sometimes people you know, and
Yeah.
I've done some of those experiments that they run where you try and set up, you know, sort of co-authored dreams where you're both in the dreams,
Mhm.
and it seems to occur. And then there's the other thing that sometimes will be brought up, that even though you think that everything in your dream world, like even in a lucid dream where you think you can control everything, every
Yeah.
so often you'll come across a variable and something that you know isn't part of you and isn't
Yeah.
part of your dream and is something foreign in there.
Mhm.
And that
Yeah.
seems to have its own consciousness, and it's going to do what it wants, not what you want it to.
And
Yeah,
there's
it's
been
something that I learned when I read Carlos Castañeda. The idea that inside your dream world, you know, you will find these visitors. You know, he will call them. You know, that will interact with dreamers, and they were a foreign consciousness. You know, they were independent of you.
Yeah, and I've 100% ran into those during out of body experiences and things like that. But even so, when I have an out of body experience, I'm still projecting or at least experiencing that experience through my physical body that's here now.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm thinking is like, when this body is dead, am I still going to be who I see myself as now? You know, like how much of your personality do you actually take with you? Or is
Right.
sort of your personality, is that tied to your physical form?
And could that shedding of the personality be what creates ghosts?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, the personality remains in some cases if it's strong enough, or
Mhm.
something traumatic happens, and they stick around here in sort of an ethereal, you know, sort of a phantom form.
Yeah, I know we mentioned this on Twitter when I talked to Red Pill on Twitter about this. Somebody, you know, brought up the whole thing like, why aren't ghosts naked? You know,
Yeah.
and I was like, well, if we're going to entertain the idea that ghosts are, some sort of dead person or whatever, then it's probably some sort of residual self-image, like in the Matrix. Like, the people appear in the Matrix like they imagine themselves to appear.
Right.
Yeah, I know. It's funny. I know Lloyd Auerbach once kind of said this thing where he says that when he goes and gives lectures, he always says, "How many people imagine themselves naked?" And there's like the one college guy in the back row who's drunk says, "Yeah, me."
Yeah.
but most people don't.
Yeah.
It's like ghosts with shoes. Apparently, it's or feet. A lot of ghosts don't have feet. Apparently, and it seems to but for some people, women apparently are more likely to have feet if they're ghosts.
Huh,
which
interesting.
Does it care about shoes or?
Well, women do care about shoes. I've noticed. I'm not a big one, but a lot of women, a lot of women care about shoes.
That's very interesting. Yeah, well, that idea that the ghosts are not really sentient beings, but are some kind of residual aspect of someone else's consciousness that survives after that person dies, that aligns with the theosophical teachings of Madame Blavatsky. She was the one who said that ghosts are almost like a serpent shedding out its skin, right? So the skin remains, but it's not really, it's not really a living serpent. It's just, a residual thing.
Yeah. But with some animation.
Yeah. Some volition, some kind of obsession, probably even. If it was, I don't know, maybe infused or programmed, if we want to go with that, jargon, with some kind of like experiences.
Well, you could say too that here to interact in this existence, we need an ego. So maybe that is the ego shed off on death.
Right.
It almost makes me think of like the zombies in George Romero's, Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. They all flock and they still do even though they're dead and they're not really conscious, they continue to do things to them that were important in their life. Yeah, right. They're not really aware of what they're doing. They're just doing it because that's what they did when they were alive. And it depends on what you're talking about when you talk about ghosts too, though. I mean,
true.
Because I think we're specifically talking about these like kind of full body apparitions that people see. And if I'm not mistaken, most of these apparitions don't like interact with people. They kind of just do whatever they do. They'll walk down a hallway or like, do some sort of activity repetitively. I mean, this is very different from people who encounter spirits that seemingly have agency or intelligence. But if I'm not mistaken, at least what I hear, most of the spirits that seem to have intelligence or agency don't manifest visibly either. So it's impossible to say, okay, well, are they a spirit of a dead person or are they some sort of external intelligence that isn't? Yeah.
I just wanted to point out, we have to be careful when we talk about agency as a sign of consciousness. Because, I mean, surely we've run across people who walk while they're sleeping, right? They're actually sleeping, but they are actually acting as if they were awake. So they are giving answers, and they're often those answers are nonsensical. So are we talking about, are those people alive at that moment? Fully alive, fully conscious? Probably not. But that brings a lot of questions.
Or, when someone's on Ambien. And I'm not talking about Roseanne making racist comments, but the fact that people would get up and
eat.
Yeah, they'd get up and eat and not know they did it.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people don't realize how much you can give off the external appearance of consciousness and awareness while not actually being conscious. Like, and people do this every day. People like who are there at work or doing some sort of repetitive task, or even while driving.
Exactly.
You're not consciously aware of everything you do when you're driving, especially if it's a route that you're very familiar with. A lot of times you'll suddenly realize you've gotten to wherever you're going, and you're like, oh, I'm here.
But how much of that is not, I mean, with some of this stuff like the Ambien or the sleepwalking, is it that the person isn't conscious, or is it a different state of consciousness, just like a dream is a different state of consciousness. I mean, I know people who simply don't remember their dreams, but everyone's dreaming.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that altered state maybe that makes it inaccessible when we're here.
I would probably say it's safe to guess that they exhibit different brainwave patterns on an EKG or something if you were to look at them. I mean, we know that people in like a meditative state express more theta wave activity. So it could be something like, but you don't know unless you're measuring that while they're in that sort of state. It's impossible to tell.
Yeah.
Or is it possible that we have both? I mean, there's the whole idea that maybe we have multiple consciousnesses.
Yeah.
Like maybe what we experience, we see as one consciousness, or we experience as one consciousness because that's what makes the most sense and allows us to live our everyday lives. But maybe we've all got multiple aspects to our consciousness. We've got this sort of day-to-day, but maybe we have a higher self too that rides along at some times and is gone at other times.
Yep.
We just
the idea is exactly because I am of the idea that neither of us is fully conscious in this plane of existence. That we are dreaming. That's why the Buddha, when they ask him, who are you? He said, well, I'm awake.
Mm-hmm. And there's also the concept, who was it that came up with it? The concept of the robot, like the robot part of us that just goes about and does the things automatically, and not just the like the breathing and the heartbeat, but the stuff we do, like the driving, in everyday life where we don't think about it.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we're less like, a person driving a car and more like a nesting doll or something. And that you keep going down. There's there's just layers and layers and layers.
Oh.
All right. What?
What's all that? Oops.
I didn't make out what you said.
Sorry. Did you hear the music that just started up on my computer?
No, I didn't hear any music.
Okay, that was interesting.
Your computer is haunted, Cherylee.
No, it just I all of a sudden I was hearing this music and I have no idea, and it stopped.
All right.
Okay.
And let's dovetail that into one of the more I think people will find annoying viral internet things, which was the what was it, the Yanny and Laurel thing. And to me, that's what, like the dress. It's interesting that two people can hear or look at the same thing and see completely different things. And it's something very physical and very material, but it simply plays on the way we perceive things. So when you look at that, you look how easily people can argue and be like, no, it's saying this or it's saying that, or, the dress is yellow or whatever. And then you think about the type of paranormal phenomena that we talk about and how ephemeral that is. That's not as solid and physical. So it's really no wonder that people pick up different stuff from it,
Yeah. I saw a lot of the Yanny and Laurel type things that were using different words.
Yeah.
And some of them were really astounding because I know a couple of them. The first one I saw, it sounded like it was saying two different words. And if you thought about the word, that's what you would hear.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And there was another one I saw that had like 12 different words, and you could hear all 12 words distinctly, assuming that you were thinking about that word, and it was unambiguous. And it just goes to show not a lot of people realize that what you perceive through your senses is not truth. It is whatever your brain decides is most fit, right? Like, because our brains are wired to perceive things, perceive patterns and stuff for survival reasons, Your brains are wired for fitness, not for truth. Truth is unimportant. It doesn't matter if something's true or not. What's important is that you don't get eaten by the tiger in the grass,
Right.
Well, they used to have that video on YouTube, it's probably still up, where they would play Led Zeppelin backwards. And the first time they did it, they wouldn't show any words, and you might or might not hear something. And the second time they would put the words on the screen about I love Satan kind of thing. And you would absolutely, that's what you'd hear when you saw the words.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. If you expect to hear something, you will hear it because your brain will fill in the gaps for you.
Yeah. Although part of the issue with the Yanny and whatever the other word was thing had to do with
Laurel.
Laurel. That's it. The word I didn't hear. But actually, I kept hearing yummy. I must have been thinking about food. But anyway, it has to do with the range of your hearing. So older people are less likely to hear it because they're more likely to have some hearing loss in the higher range. Yeah.
You lose the ability as you get older to hear higher pitches. Like you can test that too with like there's iPhone apps where you can play like a really high frequency tone and little kids will hear it and they'll go crazy because it's super loud. But like adults won't be able to hear it at all.
Well, and they used to have special music that they would play in areas where they didn't want teenagers to hang around.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And same thing as old people couldn't hear it.
Yep. I wonder if they can sense it though. Like even though you can't hear it, I still wonder if like other senses would pick up on it. Like maybe the skin could feel it or something, because like people could detect if like a TV is on or something, even though they can't hear it.
Mm.
Well, and the thing is, it's about frequency, but everything in the world is essentially frequency.
Mm-hmm.
It's all vibration, so it's no wonder that we all see things a little bit differently.
Yeah.
Our senses are not exactly the same. One person to another is different.
Mm-hmm.
And then you add into the aspect of consciousness that, sort of defines what you're seeing, based on your past experience. And we can have very different views of reality without either one being wrong.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. There is no right or wrong when it comes to perception. Like I said, your brain does not perceive truth. It just perceives whatever it needs to survive.
Yeah.
And also it's important for the culture. For example, I'm sure you guys remember those articles that were talking about how in Homer's Iliad, there is no mention of the word, the color blue. Or like saying
really?
What? Does that mean that the Greeks didn't see the color blue like we do? And it's not like that. It's just that for the Greeks, color had kind of like a different connotation. It wasn't like the hue wasn't important. What's important was kind of like something to do with the movement. So that's why when Homer described the sea, he will describe it as calm, as it was like the wine on a cup, or it will describe it like tumultuous or frothy, whatever. So the fact that they were more focused on other aspects of the sea instead of saying, the sea is blue, that tells you about how cultures interpret things differently.
Well, and I think there's also, we have a difficult time imagining that other people don't experience the world as we do.
Yeah.
And years ago, I took a color theory class at university, and where you had to do paintings like to evoke certain things by the use of color. And this one student had so much difficulty in this class. And one day the professor kind of said, your use of color suggests that you must have been sexually assaulted as a child and had this horrible thing because, and she went on and made up this incredibly nasty personal history for this student who later turned out to be colorblind.
Wow.
Yeah. And, and I kind of wondered because I thought it was very odd because my classmate couldn't just use 3 colors to mix all of the colors you need in color theory. She would buy a tube of paint for every single color name. And so that was the clue.
Okay, and so that is a person that we will deem as being limited in their perception of color, in their perception of the world, whereas someone like someone who has synesthesia will say that all of us, are in a way like blind or blinder than they are, because when they perceive color, they have a much richer sensorial experience. They see color and they see the color red and they feel the taste of vanilla in their mouth or whatever.
And I feel like this is the type of thing that should be part of general education. And I'm sure it never will be, but just that because, they're trying to define everyone the same way when they educate people, but to teach people how illusionary this stuff really is would probably help as people grew older not to think that, there's only one way to see the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say, I was incredibly shocked that a professional artist would have that much difficulty understanding that people perceive things differently.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
it's surprising.
That was really, really shocking to me at the time, particularly since one of the first things I noticed in art school was how different everybody saw. Like if you went into a class and you did a still life or drew a model, how incredibly different every person's perception of that model would be and how they recorded it on their canvas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In some cases too, though, like I think about how people don't generally think about how other people perceive the world. Like Cherylee was saying, I remember seeing something on Twitter, and I don't know if it was a joke or not. It could have just been somebody making a joke, but they said that their friend had thought that she was insane because she heard voices in her head, and she didn't realize that she was hearing her internal voice. Like, she was just thinking aloud, and she thought that other people didn't do that and that she was insane. She was like schizophrenic. It was like, no, that's just your internal voice. But it made me think, like, does everybody think the same way I do? Like when I read, like, say, for instance, when I read a book, like, do other people also hear the voices of the different characters in their head, or do they just read the words? Or like, a lot of people don't think about that kind of thing.
That and language has changed the way our brains work.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't think in symbols, we think in words.
Mm-hmm.
We don't think in images, we think in words. And if you know more than one language, your brain works very differently.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Right, Miguel?
Así es. And also, I'm fascinated by those experiments in which they give a dose of LSD to artists, and you see how the artwork goes from very somewhat traditional to incredibly abstract or expressionistic, while they are at the peak of the LSD trip, and then they come back and they kind of like wind down. So that to me is really, really, really interesting. It's something that you say, someone should try to do that on a daily basis to every type of artist or every type of, almost like, if someone is in a meeting and they're trying to solve a problem and then they can't find a solution, like, okay, we need to take a break, and we also need to take like a hit of this thing, like a 5 milligrams or something.
That's where the whole phrase, like, sleep on it comes from,
Exactly.
Like people would just take a nap or something, and the solution to them, I know a lot of mathematicians have that happen to them, where they go to sleep and they see the problem to whatever they're working on in their dream. It makes me wonder if, like, the reason that happens is that our day-to-day perceptions and experiences are filtered by our brain to wrap themselves around a certain structure that makes us more fit for survival. But something like LSD or dreaming, or they either remove those filters or bypass those filters in such a way that you get like sort of an unfiltered view of consciousness. And all those things that you were, all that structure you're placing on it evaporates.
Well, an even simpler way to see how you can change your own perception in a really bizarre way. When I was in art school, I injured one of my hands, and I actually draw with both hands kind of together. But because I had one hand I couldn't use, and it was my more dominant hand because I'm more right-handed than left-handed, that I started just working with my left hand. And my thesis supervisor came in and looked at the drawings and said, "It's like there's a whole different personality here." And he said, "Are you sure this is your work?" And I go, "Sure, I'll show you." And once I was able to use my other hand again, he said, "Could you do some drawings with just the right hand and not go back and forth the way you normally do. So I did a series with just my right hand. He said, it's like two different people, like completely different personalities. And yet no difference in my conscious awareness of what I was doing, but my left hand really likes color, loves color, and doesn't care about lines and neatness, just bright color, bold color. We'll just use color. My right hand, on the other hand, it's the one that'll take out the eraser. It's the one that's more finicky and uses lines, and there's precision there. There's like really fine line drawings come out of the right side. And it was kind of shocking to me when I looked at it, because it looked like two very different people.
And it goes back to the thing I was talking about before. Like, is individuality really an illusion? I mean, I know Grant Morrison talked about this too. Like, we see ourselves as one person. We know who we are, but is that really the case? Like, do we really all have like multiple consciousnesses or personalities living within us that, we just have this illusion that we're only one person?
And I think that's true. I think there's an interaction of different like not full personalities, but different parts of our personality that are not exactly the same. I mean, didn't the Egyptians have like all the different parts of the soul mapped out?
Yeah, you're right. Like there were like 4 parts. I can't remember.
That might have been more than that.
Right.
Yeah, those kind of ideas came to me when I was watching the series Sense8 in Netflix.
Oh yeah, yeah.
The idea that so maybe the higher self is made out of different physical bodies. The same way that maybe I myself, Miguel, is just a finger of a bigger body.
And you were right, Ren. There's 4.
Oh, okay. Wow, I just guessed. That's good. And if we really want to get like super bong hit on this red pill, we could think this: if consciousness, if like say your Ur consciousness is independent of things like time and space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe all those different personalities are all the other lives that you're living concurrently. It's all your past lives and all your future lives, and to your Ur consciousness perspective, you're living them all at the same time.
Yep.
It's all concurrent.
And I think that's probably the case.
Yeah, and if you throw in the multiverse, it's even more of a smorgasbord.
We're all made up of everyone we ever possibly could be.
Yeah. And that's a pretty infinite amount.
Yeah.
All right, let's go in a different direction, and let's talk about a couple of cryptids here. One of them is that they're trying to test the Loch Ness Monster DNA.
Now, in this article, they didn't actually find a sample of what they think is Loch Ness. They said they're just going to be testing the water samples to see if they could find anything in there that shouldn't be there, right?
Well, they're looking at the DNA of organic matter. So basically, they're studying fish poo, and whatever fish scales and things like that. Yeah, poo always seems to come up in these shows, Seriah.
Well, it's a cryptid thing,
I do like the one. Yeah, I like the one guy's like, it's a good way to get a trip to Scotland.
and someone did suggest that maybe Josh should write his next book on cryptid poo. Because it is such a common thing, you got the Bigfoot scat and all this other stuff like that which is a normal animal type of thing that you would look for.
Well, and what else would come after a Trojan feast?
Yeah, nice.
Oh, but I mean, it seems like a long shot, but when you come to things like Nessie, it seems like the possibility of something being there is, I mean, I'm not doubting that people have seen something, but a simple explanation like a lake monster, like a physical flesh and blood lake monster, seem highly unlikely.
I would agree, but it's actually a pretty good study to study what all is alive in that lake. Like,
oh yeah,
like they'll see all the different fish species and frogs and whatever else is in there. Like it's actually quite a neat kind of biodiversity study.
All
which is probably how they got funding.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, what they're trying to analyze really is not. They're not really trying to find Nessie. I mean, that's how the news articles have been headlined. But the idea is to study the biodiversity of the Loch Ness, which is, I think, one of the biggest lakes in Europe. And for me, maybe it would be interesting if they found out that there's actually a higher level of biodiversity that they were expecting to find, leading to the possibility that maybe there's some kind of undiscovered channels or passageways, in which maybe some kind of if you go with the idea that Nessie is some kind of flesh and blood animal, that maybe some kind of passageways in which migratory species could go inside the lake at some point.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, maybe there is a way in and out that something. I think that would be one of the few ways that could actually be a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
Just curious, has anyone seen Nessie recently? I mean, I feel like this is a thing I saw, as a kid all the time on TV, but.
I mean, there was someone who recorded part of. I mean, there are cameras that are 24/7, recording of the log, and there's a guy who, as a fun, as a hobby, he checks on the feedback of those cameras, and he actually managed to see an interesting shadow or something. And that appeared on the screen of this camera for 10 minutes. And this happened, I think, I don't know, a month or 2 months ago.
Now, why do you guys think that people are so fascinated with the idea of lake monsters, and especially Nessie?
I think it's the allure of water and lakes in general, because we can't see into them, and in some ways they're both dangerous to human life, but they're also supportive of human life. We've always had this relationship with bodies of water because we need water to live. We eat fish. They've always been this, I think, source of both life and death for mankind. So, I feel like so much of our so many of our mythological creatures and stuff have to do with water.
Plus, you don't want your kids playing in the water when you're not around. So
exactly. Yeah.
So you tell them, hey, there's some dangers here you should know about. Just say it.
Mm-hmm.
Monsters. All right. So the other one we had here that's sort of cryptid is this wolf-like creature that was shot.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as I know, this was in Montana. As far as I know, they have not identified it. And it is wolf-like, but they have really no idea what it is. There's some people are calling it a coy wolf, a coyote-wolf hybrid. Of course, people are saying it's a chupacabra, wolf man, and all this other stuff.
That thing looks like a coyote-wolf hybrid. I mean, I'm kind of on board with that explanation. It looks like a dog. It looks like a dog-wolf hybrid or dog-coyote hybrid. And the thing about hybrids like that, sometimes they grow weirdly big. I mean, you can look at things like ligers to see an example of that. Sometimes they have gigantism because you have weird interactions with their DNA.
Interesting.
I remember when I was very interested in cryptozoology and was checking Cryptomundo on a very regular basis, there were articles about something called the Shunka Warakin, which was also a kind of weird-ass wolf-like creature, which was also shot in Montana. I think this was in the 19th century, and actually someone stuffed this animal, and you look at it, I mean, it looks almost like a botched, dissection of a wolf.
Mm-hmm.
But some people, some cryptozoologists claim, no, this is actually a different species altogether. So yeah, I remember when this new story broke, that some people say, well, maybe this is another member of this Shunka working species of canids that live in Montana.
Hmm.
Let me see if I can find something for you guys to check. Keep talking.
Well, I mean, one thing it talks about how, all right, the front paws are abnormally small for a wolf, but it talks about the claws being large, and I'm like looking at it, I'm like, I don't know, that looks kind of like my dog's claws.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't look that crazy or weird. I don't know. I guess we'll see when the DNA
Sort
tests
of.
get back, but the weirdest thing about this article to me is like the fact that it has all these, like, it just throws everything in here. It's like a Bigfoot, like it mentions Bigfoot for no apparent reason.
And it's a BBC article. It's not off some oddball
Yeah.
site somewhere.
And then it mentions like well, with others, and it doesn't cite who these others are, wondering if it may be a dog man without giving any explanation of like what a dog man is or anything. It's
Yeah,
like,
of course.
why even bring it up? I mean, who? It's just weird. Like the article is like so I don't know, like tongue in cheek anyway. It's hard to take it seriously.
Well, it said it could be a young grizzly bear. Now that makes no sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. What?
Yeah, that was. It says bizarre theories have circulated online that it could be a werewolf, a young grizzly bear, or relative of Bigfoot. Now, seriously, that
of
doesn't look like
course.
Bigfoot to me.
Yeah, a relative of Bigfoot. Yeah, I don't get. I think that maybe they were talking about Dogman there.
Yeah,
Like-
I don't know. I thought they were like, Bigfoot's pet Sparky. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly don't have any problem believing that people online are saying these things about this, dog. But
Oh, sure.
yeah,
Yeah, but why is it included in the article?
yeah, exactly. It just seems like as a way to like make a joke about it or like ridicule. I guess I don't know.
Or just to draw in more hits.
It's true. Yeah, it's just clickbait.
Yeah, sometimes I think they find all the words that people look for online,
Yeah, put them all in the
Like
article. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, less about ridicule and more about just drawing more hits.
Shunka Waterkin.
Mm-hmm.
So there's also an article that was it was posted to the Where the Road Go group recently about the oldest Bigfoot photo. Did any of you look at this?
Nope.
Oop.
So this is this supposedly came about in 1894. And this is David Childress actually wrote this article for Ancient Origins. And it's a picture of a dead Bigfoot they supposedly shot. And I'll post it to you guys in our Slack if you want to take a quick look at the picture and stuff. Yeah, and it just on the back of it says year 1894, Yolcom River around Lilliot, BC. Forestry Hudson Bay Company. They took the picture, and the guy that was in the picture went and stole them back from the forest records. Believe his last name was Holiday. Don't know his first name. Never took all the pictures, only one, and took pictures of the rest. So basically, it's alleging that there was a cover-up because there's a very interesting information and confirms what some have suspected for many years. There is something of a cover-up going on concerning evidence of Bigfoot. We now get more complete story. There was more than one photo, and someone named Holiday apparently took the photos, or was pictured in one or more of them. He went to the forestry records of the Hudson Bay Company, where he stole back one of the photos. The number of photos taken of the Bigfoot is unknown. We might guess that there were 4 or 5 original glass plate photos. So some trappers shot and killed a Bigfoot in 1894, and they worked for the Hudson Bay Company, Canada's earliest trading company, founded in 1670. The Hudson's Bay Company is no ordinary company. It was the de facto government in large parts of North America before European states or the United States were able to lay claim to areas in this vast domain. It's a fairly long article talking about, who this company was and the land and stuff, and it's really hard to tell what you're looking at in the picture.
Yeah. It looks like a bear to me.
It could be. You would think they would know the difference between a bear.
Yeah, it's really hard to tell in the picture because it just looks like a thing laying there. I mean,
Yeah.
it's so low quality that it's, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
It's hard to make
the
it out.
age.
Yeah. Well, it brings it up in the article. Like, why would there be a cover up back then? You know, like,
Well,
Mhm.
that's true. That's true.
because
And I mean, that-
this is the age of like, P.T. Barnum kind of stuff. You figure they would have just stuffed it and put it on display at a circus or something. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, you would think. How can we profit off of this?
yeah.
Yeah.
The other article I wanted to talk about was the potential life on Mars discovery. The NASA's big announcement. Was it last week?
Yeah.
And it seems like they're slowly telling us more and more about what they're actually discovering there.
Yeah, I'll have to look at that. Didn't they just find like
Building
methane?
blocks. Yeah.
Yeah, they
Building
found.
blocks of life,
Yeah.
basically. And of course, they announced this stuff like it's a really huge deal, and then everyone thinks it's going to be, we found life on Mars or an ancient civilization, and it's, we found building blocks of life, and we go, oh, okay, like that's not really that surprising.
Yeah. But they basically ignore the the what looks like plant life on
Yeah.
Mars that you can see from orbit near the ice caps.
Yep.
That even what's his name? Was it Asimov that
No,
Like,
Arthur C.
yes.
Clarke.
Arthur C. Clarke encouraged them to look at that.
Yeah.
It's like, why are we checking that out? Like, why? It's just odd. I don't know. The whole Mars thing is odd. If anybody hasn't read Mac Tony's wonderful After the Martian Apocalypse about some of this stuff, you should check it out because he goes into some of these like things like what looks like plant life or possible like mold or like fungal type things going on
Mhm.
on Mars.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any problem believing that at some point there was a civilization there.
I still think there's life on Mars. I mean, I don't think it's on the surface.
Well,
But-
that's a possibility.
I think there's got to be like cave systems and stuff, and I think underground there's probably still liquid water, and there's probably more heat underground, and there's probably life still underground there. I mean, maybe even complex life. We don't know.
That's true.
We got to explore the underground.
I think the next rover is going to do that. I think it's going to drill deep below the surface of Mars.
Mhm.
Also, that in that mission, they're also going to have some kind of like small airplane, small drone-like plane that will be, flying over the Martian landscape. That would be cool, even if they
Yeah.
only, like manage to get it on air for a couple of minutes, and then it's hit by the sandstorm or whatever. But that will
Yeah.
be cool.
Or it's hit by relic weapon systems left there by the previous
Yeah,
inhabitants.
one of
Yeah.
the Martian sandworms get up and
I mean, I think it's extremely likely there's probably still fungal life on Mars at the very least.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I'm pretty on board with the idea that fungal life is probably panspermic in nature, and that
Yeah.
there is probably where there's ways to sort of sustain it, like carbon dioxide, oxygen, whatever it needs. Probably more south, like near the caps, because there's like deposits of carbon dioxide and stuff. But there's probably still fungal, like mats underground, that sort of thing. I don't know why we won't go look for that kind of stuff. We keep looking in these like weird areas.
They
And-
can't. They by law they can't look where the water actually is.
Why is
Now,
that?
there are treaties that say that you are not allowed to go and contaminate the water supplies of Mars. Which is kind of ironic, but actually that's true. I mean, there are articles. I mean, I remember reading those articles. I remember commenting on those a few years ago. But it's not that easy, or that everybody can go and search for life wherever they like, because there are very strict protocols to follow.
Mhm.
And going back to one of the first things we talked about with top secret craft, we may already know what's on Mars. I mean, NASA is sort of the public face. Who knows what else we have? I mean, we may have been to Mars, explored it, and just not said anything, you know?
What, Alternative 3 and all that crap?
Well, there's that, too. Wow, that's a blast from the past.
Yeah.
Well, that's where all of that breakaway civilization, jazz started.
Is it really?
Was that old TV show that ended?
Mhm.
Oh, I remember I had the book from at one point.
It was a movie or
Yeah.
a fake
It was a
documentary.
mockumentary, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
mockumentary.
Yeah.
Wasn't on the BBC.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't BBC. It was East Anglia, I think,
Oh,
television.
okay. Didn't they if I'm not mistaken, I'd heard that because of that show, because so many people thought it was real, that
Yeah.
actors who appeared on the news weren't allowed to be in movies or documentaries anymore or something.
Really?
I don't know that.
Yeah, because it was in the mockumentary. I think there's parts where there's newscasters reporting on the news or whatever, and people thought it was real because they trusted those people. They're like, oh, that's the person who's actually on the news. This this must be real.
Yeah. Huh.
Well, of course, the thing is, after it aired on television, then they came out with this thing saying, "Oh, it was all fake. Don't worry about it." But then they came out with a book that said, "Oh yeah, we had to say it was fake, but it was real."
Really?
Yes,
Yeah.
I had the book. I remember that. Or my brother had the book.
And
And
all
I
this
did not know.
makes me think too, maybe it's just a quarantine kind of thing because, a lot of times you have these sci-fi movies where, aliens eat humans. And I'm like, I just get the feeling that if a completely alien species came into contact with us, we would kill each other immediately because of our microbes. We would make each other immediately die off. I mean, that's why War of the Worlds is so great, because it actually has that aspect of it, we don't understand how our biology is going to interact with something that didn't evolve on Earth, and whether or not it's going to be, extremely deadly to us to even come into contact with.
Yeah, when that actually happened in our history, when European colonizers came in contact with the people of the quote unquote New World, I mean, they decimated the population because of all the germs they were carrying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's people who evolved on the same planet.
Right.
Imagine what
Exactly.
it's going to be like if we come into contact with something that's not even from here. How horrible is it going to be to interact with it? Maybe it won't at all. Maybe because we evolved in different places, it just, it'll be like trying to put a square peg in a round hole or something. Or
but
round
what
peg
if
in a
they?
square hole.
Yeah, but if they're not carbon-based life forms,
Mm-hmm.
we don't know how the biologies would interact.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
and it could be disastrous for both.
Yeah.
Well, that's the whole basis of Michael Crichton's The Andromeda Strain,
Oh, right. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Forgot about that movie too.
Oh, it's a really good movie.
Yeah.
What was Mac Tony's thoughts on the whole thing, Ren?
Oh, it just, he believed that there were examples, even in satellite photographs of plant life and possible fungal life in the south and north of Mars. I think he was looking at the south. It's been a while since I read that book. And he went in also too on the Martian ruins and things like that. I think his idea was that there was a Martian high technological civilization at one time, or at least it looks like there's evidence for that is probably dead by now, or it all died off. But that we see things like the face of Mars and things in Cydonia that make they look like structures. We don't know until we go there and actually explore it, but it certainly looks odd.
And it not only does it look odd, but it's one of those things where you go, all right, so NASA has these pictures that look like a face and structures on Mars. Why would that not be the first thing they went after? Why just kind of dismiss it? Is it because, there's no life on Mars, or was that not really supposed to come out?
Yeah. Or maybe they are investigating it and just aren't saying anything about it.
Yeah.
We don't know.
And again,
I feel like if I thought, if I was in charge and I felt like there was a possibility that there could be technology there, that we could use, That would be the first place I'd want to go. But
And maybe they have.
yeah, maybe they have. It kind of ties into the whole cosmic Versailles thing too. I know that what's his name talks about Dr. Farrell, that he goes on about that Mars might be off limits to mankind. Like in some ways, maybe that's why we haven't sent a manned mission yet, because it's okay. Our moon is like whatever, the moon is right there, but like getting outside of the sort of sphere of Earth is like we can't for some reason. Like it's against the law or against some sort of treaty that we're a part of that we don't remember being a part of.
Well, it's not very practical. I'm sorry, but technologically wise, you can send automated things to go places and get information so much more cheaply than to send a human out to Mars. Like, I know that there are people that say, well, we should do it just to do it the way we did the moon landings. And, there's kind of a yay humans thing behind that. But really, we can send automated devices so much easier and safer and cheaper.
Well, even to take that a step further, Cherylee, I mean, if you want to go to Mars, you can go to Mars. I mean, you can remote view Mars, or you could have an out-of-body experience and go to Mars. I've been to Jupiter in an out-of-body experience. You can explore the solar system that way. You don't have to physically go somewhere. So, I don't know. I'm with you on the whole like sending human beings in tin cans out into space is not the most efficient like use of resources.
Well, if we want to colonize it at some point, then we need to go there.
Yeah.
But I also wonder if we are not biologically linked to the Earth.
Yeah, I've said that before too.
For sure.
I almost wonder, like, what kind of effect is it going to have on human biology once we're removed from sort of the electromagnetic sphere of the Earth? Like, we don't know. Like, are we sort of biologically tied to our own planet?
And if so, there may be nothing we can really ever do about it.
Yeah.
No, I think that probably we could alter our bodies genetically in order to adapt.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe, yeah.
And
of
that's
course,
when we become the Greys.
yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's one idea. That's one of the ideas behind the myth or the mythos of the Greys. That they come from the future. Well, and this is something for another show, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, and I've said this too before, that there's no reason to think that if mankind can explore out of our body, there's no reason to think that extraterrestrials and other planets can't do the same. And maybe they're tied to their planets in the exact same way we may be tied to our own, and maybe like exploration of space is like a mental activity for conscious species.
I know in Seth Speaks, he talks about the first contact with alien life being psychic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he's probably right. I mean, I don't doubt that. That's the whole thing. I was talking to somebody about this before. It's not that I doubt the extraterrestrial hypothesis. I think we most certainly have come into contact with like literal extraterrestrials and probably will continue to do so. I just don't think they're flying here in spaceships. Like they're not coming here in starships. They're coming here mentally.
And they may even be able to form some sort of structure mentally.
Yeah, I was thinking like maybe not everybody can perceive mental beings, right? So, or maybe they can in their dreams or whatever. Maybe that's where abduction comes from, is they're experiencing it while they're in an altered state as well. But perhaps like if an alien is coming here mentally and they want to interact with mankind, like on a physical level, maybe they have to do things like build a spaceship, ad hoc. Maybe these are where these minerals that are these metals that Dr. Valet has been looking at, maybe they're forming these things on the spot as a way to interact with us.
So essentially UFOs would be apports.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Hi, Charles.
And yes, we'll hopefully be talking to him soon too. We'll leave that for a surprise for later. There were two things that just came to mind. One is that, the number of people who see UFOs, and when they see the actual craft, they feel like they're looking at something alive. They report, even though it looks like technology, they'll say, but I don't know. It felt like it was something alive. The other thing was at some point, and it might have been in Seth Speaks, someone asked Seth what UFOs were.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that they were consciousness. And
Yeah.
that they were coming here from another realm, and he stated he was kind of surprised we could see them.
Yeah, that's sort of similar to what Ephraim says in The Changing Light at Sandover when James Merrill and his partner ask Ephraim about the saucers, and Ephraim, they're talking to him to a Ouija board, and Ephraim tells him that they're not sure what the saucers are either. That the saucers seem to be from Earth, and they seem to be sort of packets of living information, but they're not quite sure either.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
They said they were like bees. Like that was his analogy, that they were sort of like bees.
Huh.
Interesting.
All right. Well, I think that's all the stories I wanted to cover. Any of you guys have anything else we should get into?
No, not for the moment.
All right. So I thank you all. This has been a great conversation, as usual. And anyone have anything coming up or anything to plug?
Nope.
All right. I guess. Thanks, Wren. Where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Mr_8ball. You can also follow me on liminalroom.com, where I occasionally write some essays on some thoughts I have about this kind of material. And I also have a Discord channel for occult and paranormal chat. And if you want an invite to it, just hit me up on Twitter.
Okay. Red Pill?
Well, I write regularly for the Daily Grail, www.dailygrail.com. I write not so regularly for Mysterious Universe, mysteriousuniverse.org. I also have my own personal website, absurdbydesign.com. You can find there, my recent art commissions or links to other things, that I do on the web.
Nice. And Cherylee, if someone wanted to talk to you, how can they do that?
They can't really. I don't do any of these things other than for you guys.
All right. They can drop us a line and we'll pass it along to you.
Well, that's okay then.
All right. Thank you all. This was great.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, Seriah. Bye, everyone.
And a big thanks to all of my patrons who are pledging $10 or more. William Lovelace, Mark Brady, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Craig Cisneros, Donna Beveridge, Sasha Lorg, Christopher Vaughn, Robert Groom, Scott Morris Everett, Chris Elmquist, Russell Wilcoxon, Patricia Giaquinta, Matthias Sundeby, John Eddy, Alfred Tuttle, Kevin Schreck, and Carla Mahoney. Thank you guys so much for the extra help, but thanks to all my patrons as well, because everything counts, and it really does help keep this show going. I appreciate it a whole lot. Thank you. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.